morning. Happy Tuesday. Welcome to Connection. We will begin today with our prayer of surrender and then straight to today's devotion. Spirit of truth, carry me where you will. Bring to me what you will. Take from me what you will. Awaken in me what you will. The Christ man is around me. The Christ mind is in me. The Christ power flows through me. And the Christ mystery exists as me. I believe it. I perceive it. And now I receive it. I am surrendered. Amen. And so it is. Okay, the title of today's devotion is The Progression of Righteousness, Peace, and Joy. And our affirmation, which we will repeat together now, is I know that righteousness, peace, and joy are a progression in my life. One builds upon the other to create for me a thriving existence. So Romans 14 tells us that the components of the kingdom of God are righteousness, peace, and joy. I believe the order of those attributes are important because they describe a progression. Righteousness or right living, right standing with God, with yourself, with your fellow man, leads to inner peace. Then having inner peace leads to a joyful life. All right, so before we read any more of the text, I just want to interject that, as I've said before, sometimes the order you do things in matters. And I've used the analogy in the past to baking something. You know how at the beginning of a recipe, they'll give you the list of all the ingredients you're going to need. But you can't just take all those ingredients and dump them in a bowl or into a casserole dish and then shove it in the oven and expect it to come out the way you want it to. No, there's an order to the recipe. There are steps. You have to melt things and then stir things and then reserve half of this to put on that later. I'm giving away the fact by talking about it that I don't know very much about baking, but what I do know is just having all the ingredients isn't enough. You have to follow the steps, and sometimes it's very important the order those steps are in. And that's how I believe this particular progression works as well. Righteousness or right standing, again, with God, with yourself, and with others, leads to inner peace. Okay, so that's step one. Then that state of inner peace is the foundation or the prerequisite, as it were, for a joyful life. Back to the text now. Many people believe it's the other way around, and that in order to be at peace in your life, you must feel or be full of joy first. But peace is actually the foundation for joy, and righteousness is the foundation for peace. Okay, back to our baking metaphor. It's kind of like a layer cake. So when you can lay your head on your pillow at night knowing you have done everything that day from a pure heart to the best of your ability. Now, time out. Here we're going to get into what righteousness is. It's not following a bunch of legalistic rules that begin with either thou shalt or thou shalt not. That is not what righteousness is. It's doing the best you can with as pure a heart and as good an intention as possible. So, knowing you have done everything from a pure heart to the best of your ability, and if you haven't, you know you have done whatever you could to make amends, okay, to make it right when you realize you've done something not right, and have repented, which does not mean to feel sorry. It means to rethink. When you have rethought your behavior, this is right action or righteousness. Then you can wake up every morning respecting, liking, and being proud of the person you see in the mirror. So it's not that you do everything exactly right all the time, but when you don't, you do your best to fix it and then move on. Tomorrow is another day. I will do better then. That kind of attitude is what brings you inner peace. Some see being in a state of peace as the ultimate goal of their lives. However, it is just a step in the process, okay? So the cake's not finished yet. Peace should be considered a basic requirement that is the foundation for a thriving, joyful existence. Okay, so let's read our ending devotion prayer together. Progressive God, help us to understand that there is a state beyond peace, and that state is joy, which should always be our ultimate goal. Amen. All right. Deep breath in. Before we say our affirmation for our connection affirmation, I just want to say on the way in, I was just telling Randy, and I think Annette was standing there too, I come down Memorial Drive. And so I saw a really bad accident there at one of the intersections. And you know how when you see that, and it was almost that feeling of, somebody was badly hurt or might even have died. And I just put my hand out. But then like the further I got, it was like, how when you get alert like that, then you start seeing, everything starts going crazy and people start cutting in front of you. And there was a big truck in the way. And I thought, I'm going to be late. And so I was kind of like this when I was pulling in the parking lot. And I was like, I've got to calm down, because I was almost in tears because of the way it affected me. And I thought, I was doing my little breathing like that, and I thought, I've got to get in a better state of mind so I can give, to the people what they're expecting. And I pulled in and I saw Miss Diane, and I had just been thinking about her. She's been gone for a few weeks due to a surgery, and I saw her and her mom. We haven't seen either of them in a while, and it just kind of gave me what I needed to go, okay. Everything's okay. It's like, this is something good and positive and healthy and happy and joyful for me to focus on. Miss Diane and Miss LaTanya are back. So thank you. Welcome back. We're so happy that things went well with your surgery, and we missed you. And thank you this morning. And that's a lesson, though, that you're not going to be able to avoid every little stressor in your life. But as quickly as you can, you need to get your mind, which we'll talk about a little bit today, focused on something joyful, something peaceful, so that you can shift out of that. Because if you don't, it just starts a downward spiral. So I just wanted to interject that before we start today. So let's say our connection affirmation together. Oh, and before we do that, though, also, happy birthday, Miss Shirley. I think today is your birthday. Anybody else have a birthday today or this week? Okay, so happy birthday, Miss Shirley. All right, I allow perfect health in my body, perfect peace in my mind, perfect unconditional love in my heart, and the perfect divine timing of spirit to guide my life in thought, word, and deed. Today we're going to talk about the concept of balance, and that being the key that unlocks the prison door for us. Sometimes, in fact, most times, if we feel we are emotionally imprisoned, it is a prison of our own making, and we are the only ones who can free ourselves. So let's talk about it. I have two quotes today, and here's the first one. I know I've used this quote before in other teachings, but it is an excellent one and therefore worth repeating. And it's by our good friend, Dr. Kim Duramo. Chaos never needs your attention. It's an indication that stillness needs your attention. And here, of course, she's talking about chaos in the modern sense of the word that we've come to know now, not its original classical meaning, which we'll get to a little later. But here she's talking about chaos in the sense of disorder and confusion. And the minute I heard her say this, something in me just clicked, and I said, yes, I believe that too. That's the secret. That's the answer. Far too often we think when we find ourselves in the midst of confusion or disorder that we must shift all of our focus and all of our energy onto the chaos, because we've got to put out that fire. We've got to, before we can do anything else, we feel that in order to restore calm and stillness, we must take some action to resolve the chaos. Okay, I'm going to go back to the story I just told. There was nothing I could do about the chaos that was on the road right then. I couldn't stop because I had to be here at a certain time. I didn't know the people. It would have probably been weird for me to get out and start praying for them or whatever I thought I might contribute. So it wasn't going to do me any good personally to keep my mind focused on that chaos that was in front of me. What helped me was when I pulled into this parking lot and saw Miss Diana and Miss LaTanya and said, okay, here's some calm and stillness and happiness for me to focus on, and instead to shift my own vibration. Okay, so it's actually the exact opposite is true. When you come across someone in chaos, or when you happen upon a chaotic situation, say you were there when that accident happened, and you are the person looking at it from the outside, what's the first thing you instinctively say to that person? Calm down. Now, this is our gut instinct, because something deep inside us knows that focusing even more on the hysteria at that point only gives it more fuel and creates more of the chaos. It fuels that fire, as it were. So we encourage the person who is in the chaos to focus on what? The calm. We try to get them to shift their focus away from whatever the source of the chaos and disorder is toward stillness. But as everyone knows, it's much easier to tell someone else to do this than to see it yourself and then tell yourself to do it. And that is a skill we need to cultivate, learning this one concept. I'm going to read it again. Chaos never needs your attention. It is an indication that stillness needs your attention. Okay, so here's the second quote. It's not chaos to order. It's chaos to balance. All right, so that's another profound truth. It is not chaos to order. Rather, it's chaos to balance. Order may indeed be the opposite of chaos, but if all we do is go from the one extreme of chaos to the other extreme of order, then we will never stop that pendulum of extremes from swinging. It will just go back and forth from chaos to order, because that is the nature of extremes. Because as we know, change is the only constant in the universe. So things are going to change. And chaos sometimes is a part of that change. So if what we're seeking is balance, okay, which I think is what we should, is the middle, when we find ourselves in chaos, it's not its opposite, it's not order, but rather balance, which is not an extreme that we need to be seeking. What we should be seeking is the middle way, because only then will that pendulum stop going from one extreme to the other and stay still right there in the middle. All right, so do you see that? Let me put it another way. Chaos to order is duality. Chaos to balance is oneness. Today we're going to talk about these two quotes and the concepts they represent in the form of an analogy of the differences between masculinity and femininity. And let me make this disclaimer before I start, as I have done in the past before other teachings. I love men. I had an extremely good relationship with men my whole life. I don't think men are the cause of all the evil in the world. There are wonderful things about the masculine. Without the masculine, we would get very little done, because masculinity is that eros principle. It's that drive forward and upward. But as I said a few minutes ago, in this world of duality that we live in, our society tends to swing from one extreme to the other. And we've been in or on that masculine, very overly masculine end of the spectrum for quite some time now. And our culture has become masculine heavy at the moment, to say the least. Interestingly enough, before we came into this era of masculinity, there was an era before it, thousands and thousands of years ago, if you study history, that was women-centric, right before the rise of what we now consider the major monotheistic Abrahamic religions. Culture was dominated by goddess religions and goddess worship, and the masculine was what was downplayed. So when I talk today and use the analogy of masculine versus feminine, please understand I'm not saying one is better than the other. In fact, that's what the whole quote is about, finding the balance between the two, or better yet, finding a way for the two to cooperate rather than compete. Also, please remember that all of us, both men and women, contain within us both masculine and feminine. And this teaching is much more about reconciling those two qualities within us as individuals. It's more about that than men versus women. So, I'm not trying to start a gender war or bash men. So, everybody good? Great. Back to the quote. It's not chaos to order. It's chaos to balance. If we look at chaos and order as opposites, as extremes of the spectrum, then we can use the analogy that chaos is feminine while order is masculine. Now think about it. That's about right, given the archetypes of our culture. We think of the feminine as highly emotional, a little scatterbrain, chaotic, okay? And we think of the masculine as controlled, reserved, rational, objective. It's a lot like when we talk about God being both the light and the dark. One without the other is not a complete picture of God. You can also think of that concept in terms of the light representing the masculine, or the sun, which a lot of philosophies do, and the darkness representing the feminine, or the moon, what is hidden, what is mysterious. The light is what we can see, what we can know of God, and the darkness is the mysterious side of God, or goddess. Spirit has no gender. In this age of patriarchy that started some 5,000 or 6,000 years ago, we refer to our supreme deity as God. But as I said prior to that, the religions were all goddess-centered, and neither is complete without the other. So as I mentioned earlier, there is a classical definition of the word chaos, and it is simply void. And a void is usually a place of darkness. But we don't have to be afraid of the dark, because actually darkness, or the void, or chaos, is the point of origin for every created thing. Everything begins in and comes out of darkness, even our earth. We read this in the very first passages in the whole Bible. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness covered the face of the deep. Same thing, we as humans begin our lives when we are born out of the darkness of the womb. And again, so darkness is connected to or represented by the feminine. But the original meaning of the word chaos is void. So wherever there is a void, there is the potential for creation. That's what God did. He reached into the darkness of the void and he recreated what was already there. He formed something out of something that was previously formless and in the dark. When we find ourselves in chaos or the void, it's up to us to do the same thing, to create from it whatever we will. Sometimes, unfortunately, what we decide to create, either consciously or unconsciously, are prisons for ourselves or for each other. And I think one prison we have created for ourselves collectively, especially in this country, is the prison of these stereotypes of the masculine and the feminine. And specifically how pretty much every cultural institution, from government to religion to sports to music, the film industry, etc., over the last few thousand years has systematically worked to either entirely or entirely erase or seriously diminish or dismiss the feminine power and the feminine perspective of the world. We refer to it as the patriarchy. And that's a prison we have created for both men and women, because both men and women have suffered from the creation of this mental prison of a male-dominated worldview. So does that surprise you to hear me say that women are not the only ones who suffer under the patriarchy? Some women believe this, but it's not true. Men suffer just as much because it has caused them to cut out a part of themselves that is also necessary. As I said, God is not complete without both the light and the dark. The masculine is not complete without the feminine. We as individuals and we as a society are not complete and whole without both our masculine and our feminine qualities and characteristics. And when either of those get out of balance, we all suffer. I'm going to read now from a piece by a woman named Madison Taylor, and it's called Personal Power. She says, power is not about exerting our will over others. It's about being in complete truth with yourself. Many of us do not understand what personal power means. We have been given the false notion that power is bad, that it is something we use to exert our will upon others. However, when our personal power is intact, we are neither overbearing nor meek. We have a clear sense of our strength and the impact we can have on others. Okay, I want to stop right here. Do you hear the difference between those two concepts of what strength is and what power is? It's a subtle difference, but it is an important one. Many of us, through our cultural conditioning, the things we've been taught and what we have seen modeled in front of us, believe that power means to have power over someone else, or that our idea, our truth, our way of being and relating to the world and to others is stronger or better than someone else's. That is what is known as power over. And this is a very masculine approach to life. If others aren't believing as we do, then we will force them to. Forcing others to bend to your will, to come into line with your worldview, is what many of us view as power and strength. And if you look at the history of the country that we live in, the United States, you see that this particular view of what power and strength are is very prevalent. The United States of America, which is only a few hundred years old, was pretty much birthed into and by this particular concept of power and strength. Whoever was the strongest physically, or whoever had the biggest or more guns, won. They had the power over those who were physically weaker or who didn't have any guns. Also, those who had the most money held power over those who did not. And this is how it's always been in America. It is a nation, it was a nation and is still a nation that was founded by rich, or at least land-owning, white men. And for the entire time we've been a nation, rich white men have always had and maintained the most power. It began as a culture that was completely dominated and saturated with that masculine energy. And for the last 200 to 400 years, we've seen how that concept of power has played out. So that's one concept of power. But going back to the last line of the piece, it says, when our personal power is intact, we have a clear sense of our strength and the impact we can have on others. This is the subtle difference I was talking about. This view of power is not power over others, but the power we have to impact or influence others. This view of power is more about making an impact or an impression on someone than about winning. It's winning them over rather than winning over them, okay, if that makes any sense. It's the difference between showing them a better way so that they follow you voluntarily and forcing them to do it your way. Okay, back to the article. This actually enables us to be more sensitive. Personal power is what permits us to work on behalf of our dreams and desires. It allows us to realize that we are worthy and deserve to be heard. In addition, our personal power lets us extend the respect we know we deserve to the people around us. There is no reason to be afraid or ashamed of fully owning your power. Okay, so this is talking about personal power being more effective when we view it from the more feminine perspective of the power that we have to influence people rather than from that ultra masculine power of power over viewpoint. And the last part talks about part of our personal power being rooted in the fact that we recognize that others deserve the same respect we feel we deserve, and that it's our responsibility to extend this to them. So one of the ways we can start dismantling this prison of patriarchy or anything else, any other system such as racism, which we'll get to in just a second, that we've built for ourselves, is by realizing that our freedom depends upon the freedom we are willing to give others, because we are all connected. I'm going to read now from an article called "No One is Free Until We're All Free," and it's by Rabbi Alyssa Wise. She says, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. famously said, "No one is free until we are all free." This idea, profound in its simplicity, finds company among famous aphorisms in the Jewish tradition. The biblical command to love your neighbor as yourself, and Hillel, the elders' famous principles, that which is hateful to you, do not do to your neighbor. These ideas rely on and are deepened by the concept that you not only must love, you must also not do what another hates. And you must know your freedom is bound up in your neighbor's, no matter how comfortable you are. These ethical realities and complexities are the focus of a practice called Mussar, M-U-S-S-A-R, the Jewish ethical tradition. The invitation of Mussar is to be mindful and respectful of the burdens of others, nearly the same invitation Dr. King made through his leadership in the civil rights movement. At its most basic, an anti-racist commitment is one that promises equality and dignity, honors our interconnectedness, and contains a commitment to an ongoing process of honest self-reflection. This is the spiritual obligation of Judaism, and Mussar is one of the paths to it. Each evening, I take out my Mussar journal as part of my regular Mussar practice. I reflect on the day and how I have met my obligations to my neighbor. Have I done to someone what I would hate to have done to me? Have I mistaken my privilege for freedom? At the weekly meetings of my Mussar Council practitioners, we support and challenge each other to answer these questions honestly and fully, and to change the way we behave, not just the way that we think. So Rabbi Wise is saying here that one of the keys to unlocking the door of our prison is to, first, as I said, realize that because we're all connected, the degree to which we imprison or hold down or discount or disregard others is the degree to which we imprison, hold down, discount, and disregard ourselves. Secondly, we must hold ourselves accountable for both our thoughts and our behavior. And to do this, we've got to dig down much deeper than just the surface level, because a lot of this stuff we believe has been ingrained in our culture for thousands of years and has become so normalized we don't even recognize it. So we have to make a practice of asking ourselves tough questions and always be willing to self-reflect before we start projecting onto others. A fantastic example of this, I think, is a live video that was posted several years back on Facebook by our good friend, Reverend John Scott. And I think I've shared this with you before, but I want to share it with you again today. He is a personal friend of mine and my brother's, and he's ministered here many times at the church. But I was so amazed at the level of his honesty in this video. So I'm going to share a part of what he said with you today. And these are the kinds of conversations we're going to need to have with ourselves if we want to walk out of these self-imposed prisons we put ourselves in, as well as others, mentally and emotionally. And if we want to stop that pendulum from swinging from extreme to extreme and going not from chaos to order, but from chaos finally to balance. To do that, this is the level of honesty and self-reflection it's going to take. He's talking here about the subject of toxic masculinity. And as I mentioned earlier, not all masculinity is toxic, but some of it is. He says, I want to speak on the topic of toxic masculinity for a moment as a white, straight, middle-aged male. There are several things that have happened to me in the course of my lifetime that have caused me to evolve and move forward in my way of thinking. As one thinks in their heart, so are they. It's who you become. Your thoughts lead to your reality. And you don't even necessarily know you're doing it most of the time. It's on autopilot. Here are some definitions I think we need to see, and I wouldn't have seen them had I not been challenged by my own daughters. Most of us men, especially those who are in my age group, I would say he's in his early 40s, and older, were raised in a world that was a man's world in many ways. It still is. And this is why we must experience a shift in the way we think. Let me give some definitions. Toxic masculinity speaks like this: stop being a sissy. Rub some dirt in it and walk it off. You hit like a girl. Boys don't cry. Put that woman in her place. Man up. So this is the mentality that accompanies toxic masculinity. And what I think is happening when we think there is a war on men going on right now is that there are some women out there who have experienced an immense amount of oppression and pain and abuse and have been held in a different space when it comes to equality with men. So there are some very angry women out there, and understandably so. If you've been raised with these ideas of toxic masculinity, such as stop crying, don't be a sissy, don't act, speak, run, hit, dress like a girl, then it's been implied to you that women are inferior. Women without their femininity are less than. Women and their femininity are less than. So don't act like them. We didn't even realize that, but that's what that says. Now, we as men who think of ourselves as evolved or even as romantic or sensitive don't want to admit that we think that way. Men who would defend women in their rights don't want to believe that we have these propensities, but we do because they've been plugged into the hard drive of our brains. And often we don't even realize this until someone tells us we're in this space. In my case, it was my daughters. And when they challenged me about having sexist opinions, I didn't like it. I got mad and immediately started justifying myself. But I didn't realize there was a booger on my face until they put a mirror in front of me. You don't realize the toxicity you have within your being until someone else forces you to see it. And I'll tell you something. I think enlightenment through suffering is overrated. I would like to see us get ahead of the curve, and instead of having to have something cause us to suffer before we see it, just be able to look in the mirror and say, oh, there it is. When somebody puts a mirror in front of your face, as my daughters did to me, you have to acknowledge what's there and either continue to walk around with the booger on your face or do something about it. But most of us choose the hard way, the suffering, because we don't like to be told there's something not quite right with us. Someone pointing out toxic masculinity is not an attack on men. It's not masculinity that most feminists are at war with, only the version of masculinity that seeks to hold women down and that considers them inferior. On the other hand, there are some feminists out there who are crazy and out of balance as well. Does toxic feminism exist? Sure. But it's only the result of elongated repression and oppression by toxic masculinity. Yes, some women hate men, just like some men hate women, because they think the responsibility for all their failed relationships belong on the shoulders of the people they were with. But I'm going to tell you something. If you have had multiple failed relationships and you don't look at yourself first, then you've decided to remain in ignorance. I've had to do it in my own life. Now, I want you to listen to how honest he gets here with himself, which, as I've said, is the key to unlocking the door and letting ourselves out of this prison of our own making. He continues, I had to look inside myself and realize, now listen to this. He said this out loud in a public forum, which I applaud him for. I had to look inside myself and realize that my first wife was a better wife to me than I was a husband to her. And a lot of it was because I didn't understand yet what it was to be my true, healthy, whole self. I still had to deal with all my own toxic masculinity. And then in my second marriage, one of the things I can say I'm grateful for is the day my wife said to me, "You're not spiritual, you're just a blank hole that goes to church." So, wow, he said. Now, we were in an argument and she was mad at me, but I still needed to deal with her observation. I had a choice. I could either justify my position and fight back, or I could look at myself and see if there was any truth to what she was saying. And after I got through being angry, that's what I chose to do. I didn't even realize how toxic I still was at that point from being raised in an environment that lied to me about a lot of things, both about the nature of spirituality and what it means to be a man. If you can't see something within yourself, you can't heal from it. So if you find yourself feeling angry and wanting to push back when you are shown things, you might want to ask yourself, is this true? All right, so kudos, applause to Reverend John for sharing with the whole world something brutally honest about himself and his life. But guess what? Now that he's done it, he's free. He's let himself out of that prison of toxic masculinity that he was in for a good portion of his life. And I happen to know that he is now a better person and a happier man for it. Okay, so let's wrap up today with some song lyrics. One of my favorite songwriters is Sting, and he always writes very intelligent and very deep lyrics. And one of my favorite songs of his is Fortress Around Your Heart. The whole song is wonderful, but the part I want to concentrate on today is the chorus. It alludes to just what we've been talking about, how we imprison each other and ourselves with these false ideas our society and our culture has taught us. But we don't have to stay in those prisons. You know why? Because we made them. Not us specifically, but mankind. We created them, so we can destroy them. As we talk about so often, we are made in God's image. We are created by God. We are creative like God. And we are always creating as or along with God. We have the power to recreate the things that we created in error or that we don't like. And I don't think any of us like the mental prisons that we have created. The chorus of the song says this, "And if I built this fortress around your heart, encircled you with trenches and barbed wire, then let me build a bridge, for I cannot fill the chasm, and let me set the battlements on fire." So battlements, I looked that word up to get the exact definition. It is a wall around the top of a castle with open spaces at regular intervals through which the people inside the castle can shoot. Okay, so you've seen everybody's seen those castles with the little, it looks like teeth, or like spaces between. I never knew until I looked that that's the purpose for that, was so they could get in the open space and shoot and then get right back behind the space that's covered. So let's stop building fortresses from which we shoot each other and then duck back inside and hide. Let's let go of our defensive, overly masculine view of power over others and feeling we must force everyone else to bend to our will, which even has crept into Christianity thousands of years ago with the Crusades. You remember the Spanish Inquisition? It was literally, if you don't convert, we will kill you. So that mindset even crept into Christianity, which is supposed to be about love. So let's set the battlements on fire, as the song says, and burn the prison down. Life is too short to spend any more time there than we already have. Lastly, let's remember it's always an inside job. When you find yourself in chaos, disorder, darkness, shift your focus away from the chaos to the calm, because only in the stillness and the balance between the extremes can you realize who has the key to your prison door. So in the incredibly wise words of the rock band The Eagles, here comes some more song lyrics. Well, I know it wasn't you who held me down. Heaven knows it wasn't you who set me free. So oftentimes it happens that we live our lives in chains and we never even know we have the key. So don't blame any chaos in your life on someone else or on the devil. Have the courage to look inside and see where it's coming from, and if there is any truth to what you are you're seeing in the mirror that others are holding up for you. Ask yourself some tough questions and answer them honestly. Be brave enough to cut through all your cultural conditioning and, as Reverend John Scott said, see the booger on your face and choose to do something about it. Don't leave it there, because that's ugly for everybody else to see. You don't see it, everybody else has got to see it. And that's a pretty clear picture as well. Your issues, you don't have to look at them. The person you're talking to this far away from your face has to keep looking at it. All right. Because if you don't fix it, nobody else will. You are the only one who is able to fix you. Amen? Amen. So let's stand. Mom, if you want to come up here I think he's turned the keyboard on for you. And Miss Diana is back. So we're going to sing Blessed Always as we end. If you want to stand up, please remember to join us tomorrow evening for our Wednesday night series on A New Earth, as well as Friday morning on Zoom or YouTube, wherever you catch our devotion at 7 a.m. and Sunday at 10.
Let our joy be so triumphant that we rest in God and say Amen. Blessed always, for the arms of God surround us. Let our joy be so triumphant that we rest in God and say Amen.
Have a great week. I love you. Be at peace. Oh, yes, Wednesday night, if I don't know if they're still there, but after the devotion and the teaching on Wednesday night, my brother's going to do a cooking class as a part of the Wednesday night service. So we're looking forward to that. Thank you for reminding me.